Hello, my name is Stephanie Hagstrom, and I'm the Director of Community Development at the Research Data Alliance US, and the host of today's webinar titled Introducing 10 Things for Curating Reproducible and Fair Research. Before we get started today, I do have a bit of information that I'd like to share with you about RDA and to go over some housekeeping. The Research Data Alliance is a community of 12,784 data experts from 148 countries who collaborate and build the social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and reuse of data. Members of the RDA come together through self-formed, focused working groups, exploratory interest groups, and communities of practice groups to exchange knowledge and discoveries. They also discuss barriers and potential solutions, define policies and test standards, and many of the, I think we're up to 90 actually groups, last I looked, active groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global data sharing and reuse. We also have 30 national groups that support initiatives of the RDA members in those regions by providing a platform to interact on a global level. Those national groups may be individual countries or groups of countries. As an example, there's a region of Americas that includes all countries within North America and Latin America. There are also 4 contributing regions with France, Australia, and the EU and the United States, who each provide the resources to support and sustain the RDA global operations. The RDA US is one of the recognized regions with over 2,600 RDA members. And in addition to providing resources to sustain the global operations, the RDA US also supports the RDA global community by hosting and coordinating community activities, including this webinar series, featuring working and interest group outputs. We've also recently launched a podcast series featuring interviews and discussions with group co-chairs of newly endorsed groups. And we host a series in Latin America as a way to introduce the RDA community there. I will have more information on all of these series at the end of the webinar. In addition to the 4 contributing regions, there's also 58 organizational members who contribute resources to the RDA global operations, and 12 affiliate members that support the RDA in a variety of ways. So just a few things to go over with today's webinar. We are pleased to announce that we have 2 interpreters here with us today, live interpretation of Spanish and French. And if you wish to listen to a translation of this webinar, you can select the globe at the bottom of your Zoom control screen and go into the room to listen if you haven't already. We'll also be recording today in all 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish, and we will add a link to the recordings on the RDA website webinar page. We've also allotted time at the end of the webinar for questions. We really would appreciate it if you could use the Q&A section at the bottom of your control rather than chat or raising your hands. We have quite a few people at this webinar today, and we want to keep track of those questions in case we go over. If we go over and we can't answer all the questions, we will transfer them to a Google Doc and ask the presenters to answer them, and we will send you those answers in an email next week. So that's all I have for today, and I'm going to pass it over to Tom Honeyman now, who's the moderator for the webinar. Thanks, Tom. Stop sharing.
Just sharing the screen, which if you could just confirm that the slides are showing, then we can get underway. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning, today, this evening, wherever your time zone is. I'll be your moderator to guide us through today. And so just quickly, I wanted to show the agenda for today. We're going to spend the majority of today talking about what the CureFair working group recommendation was. But we do have time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So please do pop those things in the Q&A. I'd like to begin by introducing our speakers today. Starting with Dr. Limor Pierre is an Associate Director for Research and Strategic Initiatives at the Institution for Social and Policy Studies, or ISPS, at Yale University. Lima works on research transparency and reproducibility, establishing the ISPS data archive, and leading the project to develop YARD, a workflow tool for reviewing and enhancing research outputs. She is co-founder of the Curation for Reproducibility Consortium of social science data archives, and is currently co-chairing a working group on the reproducibility issues at the Research Data Alliance and ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery. Limor received a PhD in Communication Studies from Northwestern. We have Mandy Gooch joining us today. Mandy is a research data archivist at the Odum Institute at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She works closely with students, faculty, and staff across the campus, providing data management consultation and training. Additionally, she oversees the data verification service offered by Odum Institute and works with editors of social science journals to implement and maintain their data verification workflows throughout the manuscript submission process. Florio Aguilas is a research associate at the Cornell Center for Social Sciences. He manages the result reproduction and data document service at the Cornell Center for Social Sciences. He also helps social science researchers on campus in qualitative and quantitative data management and processing, assessing, and mitigating disclosure risks. He develops and conducts seminars, trainings, and training sessions and workshops on the use of both qualitative and quantitative software packages, such as SAS, SPSS, Stata, and Atlas.ti, and on research transparency and reproducibility, amongst other things. He received his master's and PhD in developmental sociology from Cornell. Sadly, we're not joined by Tumai Christian, who is the Assistant Director for Archives at the Odum Institute for Research in Social Science at the University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill. Tumai is unable to join us thanks to an unresolvable scheduling error, and Mandy will be stepping in to talk to her section of the presentation. Finally, I am Dr. Tom Honeyman. I'm the Research Software Program Manager at the Australian Research Data Commons, where I lead a program of activities working towards recognition of research software as a first-class output of research. Let's move on. Oops. And I'm going to hand over to Limor to start us off.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. And thanks to everyone who's joining us here today. And thanks to RDA for organizing this webinar. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to kind of set the table a little bit about where the working group is coming from, what our concerns are, and a little bit about the work that we've done over the past 18 months to 2 years. Before we dive into the group's output and recommendation. So we thought it would be helpful to start by contextualizing the work of the working group with a statement of the problem, which in our minds is the fact that there is no computational reproducibility standard that's adopted as an integral part of normative scientific practice. If you think of the social sciences in particular, which is where some of us are based, there really is a variety of different research methods. There's many data sources, and there's a lack of standardized approach to how to curate for publishing and archiving reproducible and fair research. So next slide, please, Tom. So just to be clear on what we mean by some of the terms that we're going to be using, because I believe we have people from a variety of different backgrounds, we want to just be clear what we mean by computational reproducibility. And that is the ability to recreate computational results from data and code used by the original researchers. So same data, same code, we can reproduce the results that were reported. When we're talking about curation, what are we talking about? We're talking about management and preservation of data over the long term. Now, this involves typically a set of actions that are guided by FAIR principles to determine which outputs we should keep, how to preserve them, why to preserve them, who should keep them, for how long, etc. And so there really is a series of actions that have to be taken over time in relation to these materials, and that is what we mean by curation. So in the context of reproducibility, curation means something a little bit different. So we're all familiar with the term data curation, where these actions are applied to data. When we're thinking about reproducibility, we're really thinking about what we're calling the research compendium. We're not the first one to come up with that term, obviously. There's also other references like reproducible file bundle, or in political science, people call it a replication package. But what we're talking about is the collection of research artifacts of these digital materials that are that comprise the results, right? So the data, the code, and other materials like code book that are necessary to for other users down the road to independently understand what is the computation that is being performed here, how the results were arrived, and more importantly, or as importantly, to actually repeat the entirety of the workflow, ideally from data processing all the way to analysis and the production of results. So the research compendium includes all of these various components, and that is what we are curating. So when we're talking about curating for reproducibility or cure fair, again, the object of curation is the research compendium, and the goal, why we're doing this, is to enable continued access to the compendium as a whole, as well as its component parts, in order to independently reproduce the associated results. So let's talk a little bit, next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about who is affected by the problem that we identified, by the lack of a standardized approach to curating for reproducible and fair research. So we think that there's a large number of different stakeholders, researchers, of course, but also curators, publishers, funders, repository managers, reviewers, basically others, anyone who has a stake in either creating, using, sharing, publishing, or preserving reproducible research. And all of these stakeholders can benefit from more clarity about whether we can achieve computational reproducibility with this set of materials in relation to reported results, and whether the quality of the research compendium and its component part actually meet standards that we care about, like FAIR standards and long-term archival preservation. So in the course of doing the work to come up with these guidelines for standards, the Cure Fair working group at RDA, which was formed back in July of 2019, we really formed a group in order to work on creating a standardized approach. And as a result of the work, at the end of our time period, we delivered what we're calling the 10 Things document, which was endorsed by RDA in June of 2022. And the 10 things for curating for fair and reproducible and fair research is what we will spend time talking about today. But first, I just wanted to mention and highlight some of the other outputs that our working group produced along the way, en route basically to our final output. So before describing these, I just want to make sure too that I mention and acknowledge the members of the working group who have contributed to the working group's success in a variety of ways. It really is a testament to the RDA organization for bringing together really a diverse group of people and facilitating and creating conditions for people to work together and be productive. So we've had, members of our working group working in various ways, participating in meetings, doing research, writing, contributing, reviewing. And it was really a true group effort. And I know Tom will have slides later at the end that will list everyone. So just real quick to go over a couple of the supporting outputs that we've created along the way. And they're really meant, they're available publicly. You'll see the links here, and they're meant to reinforce our final recommendation, but also to be used independently for anyone who's interested. So we had a subgroup of the working group working on what we called Cure Fair challenges. And so this group collected information from a variety of stakeholders, researchers, publishers, funders, data professionals, research software engineers, all about what their challenges are when they're trying to address computational reproducibility. And so we used a variety of methods to get the information and wrote a report that summarizes our findings. The second output that we provide is an annotated bibliography of literature, basically, that addresses data curation, code review, reproducibility, anything in that kind of sphere. It's a Zotero library, and there's Mandy and her group did a great job annotating and tagging every entry. So we really have a comprehensive way to sort of capture the literature and the different perspectives on this topic. And again, the link is on the screen. And finally, we have an open survey that's still open. It's an opportunity for groups or individuals who are doing cure fair work. In other words, curating for fair and reproducible research outputs, to answer a few questions and get into our database. Right now, we've identified over 20 organizations spanning from research institutions, scholarly journals, various data repositories who offer it as a service, and other groups and third parties that offer support for reproducibility. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mandy, who will tell us a little bit more about the main attraction for today.
Thank you so much, Limor. Thank you all very much for attending. So I am going to do some highlights over the 10 things for curating reproducible and fair research today. You will be able to access all of these documents. They're all readily available, and we will share the links throughout the slides. So please feel free to visit the websites or any of our RDA outputs. So first off, I just want to sort of briefly describe what the 10 things are. So they are standards-based guidelines for best practices in publishing and archiving computationally reproducible studies. And the focus for our product here is on social science research that relies on quantitative data to produce results. However, as you will see, this is really sort of a template that others can build upon to make it more related to your actual disciplines. The intended audience for this is very large, but there are a lot of people who would be involved in curating reproducible and fair research. So it is data curators and information professionals who are charged with these sort of tasks and these actions. And then it's also researchers, publishers, editors, reviewers, anyone who has a stake in creating, using, sharing, publishing, or preserving reproducible research. Next slide, please. So just to give some context, the formatting of the 10 things document was heavily influenced by other things documents that have been created by other groups, such as the Library, Carpentry and Collaborators Top 10 Fair Data and Software Things, Australian Research Data Commons' 23 Research Data Things, or the Griffith University Library and E-Research Services Reproducible Research Things. So there is a precedent for this sort of format, and we really took to the idea of displaying this content in this sort of manner because I think it's it's easily digestible and you can use it again as like a template to sort of customize for your own disciplinary needs. But the way that it starts out, you will see that there's an introduction section within our 10 things. So this is where we sort of lay the foundation and the groundwork, where we define the terms that we use throughout the document so that there's no real confusion. Because let's be real, there are a lot of terms that are very similar across disciplines, but have some minute differences here and there. So we want to make sure everybody's starting on the same foundation. We identify activities relevant to curation and computational reproducibility within this introduction as well. And then we describe the purpose of the 10 things for curating and for curating reproducible and fair research. Finally, you'll see a table of contents right under this introduction section, and this just explains the format, where we got the things format to begin with, but also how each thing is broken down. So you have a section in each thing that describes the issue, followed by 3 actionable sections that are labeled Get Started, Learn More, and Go Deeper. So the Get Started section is really the introductory level information, some questions to consider, concepts to sort of get you started in understanding how to do that particular thing. The Learn More section it goes a little bit deeper than that, where it provides some additional resources and information to sort of help you better understand some of the nuances of those things. And then the Go Deeper section is really where it gets down into the nitty-gritty, and it may offer resources specific to certain disciplines. It may offer tools and other technologies to explore to help you better understand and learn more about that thing. And each thing refers to a particular question that the thing addresses. Next slide, please. So as we were composing the 10 things, we looked at the breadth of information that we had gathered in the other outputs and came to a group of questions, essentially, that we wanted these things to address, because we felt that this would be the best approach to really understanding curating reproducible and fair research best practices. So these are the questions. I'm not going to read through all of them, but these are the questions that we identified. And from this, we extracted sort of different things that would address those questions. So next slide, please. And these are the 10 things that we came up with to address those questions. So you have completeness, which is talking about the completeness of the research compendium itself. You have organization, making sure that everything is easy to understand and keeping track of the various objects within the research compendium. Economy, so fewer objects in the compendium mean fewer things can break and less ongoing maintenance. Transparency, so giving the full context necessary to really understand what happened in the research process. Documentation, so this is the process and reasoning required to reproduce your scientific claims, so making sure that it's all well documented. Access, so making sure that it is clear who can use what, how, and under what conditions, with open obviously being preferred. And then provenance is number 7, so talking about the origin of the components of the compendium and the changes that have happened over time throughout the research process to those components. Metadata, which is obviously about the information about the compendium and its components in a standardized schematic code. Automation, so as much as possible, ensuring that the computational workflow is script-based to allow for re-execution with minimal manual actions on the part of any kind of secondary user. And then finally, review. So a series of managed activities being made to ensure that there's continued access and functionality to the compendium itself. So you don't want to just do it and shove it away and make it accessible and then never touch it again, because you want to make sure that it's always going to be accessible. So next slide, please. Thank you so much. So here is our CureFair Working Group Recommendation RDA card with our citation. So you can go to this citation to see this information. What we have also done, if you could go to the next slide, please, Tom, thank you. What we have also done is we have transcribed all of this information into a website. So here is the website URL. You can actually go through this website and see each of the things and explore the entire document that way, or you can use the citation previously if you would rather do it in a PDF format. Totally up to you. This website was crafted on GitHub, so you can also see the GitHub site as well. And then next slide, please. So the really fantastic thing about using this 10 things format is that it is modular. So you don't have to start at the very beginning with thing 1. If you know enough about certain things, you can skip to those things which are relevant. And you can also choose within the actual activity level, the get started, learn more, and then go deeper to determine which level of activity matches your experience. So if you feel that you are maybe lacking in some knowledge about documentation, maybe you start at the very top of that thing and you go through get started all the way down through go deeper, but maybe you know a lot about economy, and so you don't really need as much information there, so you just check out the go deeper. Again, this is customizable. So right now it is geared towards social sciences because that's where a lot of our background is. However, you can easily alter resources and customize it to meet the needs of your own disciplines. And there's potential for broader use in the life sciences and long tail, small scale data analysis. And again, data archives, institutional repositories, any scientific publishers, etc., willing to adopt the guidelines would benefit from a standardized approach to cure fair, and what we hope will spur the development of widely applicable solutions. So this is our recommendation for really introducing best practices and standards of curating reproducible and fair research. And that is where I will pause for now. I will come back in a bit, but I'm going to pass this over to Florio. So Florio, thank you.
So the Cornell Center for Social Sciences is one of the adopter of the 10 things. The Cornell Center, the CCSS provides a results reproduction service to social science researchers at Cornell, where we verify and certify the reproducibility of their study prior to submitting the paper for publication. Our service has adopted the 10 things for curating reproducible and fair research fully. Our level of adoption is at the production level. We will continue to adopt these recommendations and not to have to modify them for our use. Tom, can you move on to the next slide? Adopting the recommendation took minimal effort, as we have always incorporated them into our services. I genuinely believe it will be a minimal effort also for all if these recommendations are incorporated from the very beginning of the project. Overall, we have had a very good experience following the 10 things, and we'll continue to adopt these in our workflow. Now, to illustrate our adoption of the 10 cure things, let's look at one of the studies that we have reproduced. We've created a catalog for its reproducibility package in our data and reproduction archive. You can access our archive by going to archive.cicer.cornell.edu. And then you search the studies where we reproduce by typing R2 on the search box or the author's name. Now, Tom, kindly please show the link to the sample catalog. So this is a sample catalog of the study that we reproduced, authored by Eva Marie Memken and Mark Billamir. So we created this catalog for them. You can see on the upper left corner, we provided a DOI that they can give to the journal. We also have a reference, a link to the reference to the article. So if you click on that link at the bottom under reference article, it takes you to the journal article. And then the journal article has a data tab, data availability tab, which loops back to this catalog. At the same time, we've also included the ORCID and ResearchGate profile information of the authors so that they can be contacted. This is part of our authors being transparent about their work. Eva Marie, for example, is no longer with Cornell, but you can contact her because you can find her through her ORCID profile. So this is thing number 6. We provide access. We offer to host the reproducibility package in our data and reproduction archive. We provide a DOE, as I've mentioned. The reproducibility package we prepare also includes information about who can use the reproducibility package, how and under what conditions, basically the license information. Now you can download the package in just one zip file if you click on the data and documentation tab. This is basically thing number 3, economy. Under economy, we recommend that clients remove or comment out unnecessary lines of code, output, and data. The reproducibility package is complete, which is thing number 1, completeness. It contains all the files needed to reproduce the study, the code, the output, data, including the libraries and packages used in the analysis. This package, however, this particular package that you are looking at, the study, does not include data because the authors do not own them. However, it has a detailed data availability statement embedded in the README that states how to get the data and in which folder to put them in the reproducibility package for the code to work. Now, this reproducibility package is well organized, which is thing number 2, organization. This study follows the tier protocol for organizing files. The folder follows a logical structure. You can tell where the data files are, where the output files are, where the program files are, where the libraries are, and more. Now for transparency, which is thing number 4, we provided explicit instructions on accessing the data. As to analytic transparency, the analytic process is documented in the code. And embedded in the code and the README is the contact information of the authors of the manuscript, data and code. So reusers can contact them directly if needed. Now, the reproducibility package has documentation about the data, which is thing number 5. We even included a highlighted output comparison file for reusers to be able to compare the output they generated with those used by the authors. As to thing number 7, which is provenance, as I mentioned, this package does not contain data, but the reuser is given clear instructions on where to get the data and put it in the reproducibility package. This way, we do not proliferate multiple versions of the data. We can establish the provenance from the primary source itself. As to thing number 8, metadata, we've added sufficient metadata to the research compendium in our archive catalog. As you can see, we even linked earlier, as you saw earlier, we linked the author's ORCID and ResearchGate profiles so reusers can view what other related studies our authors have co-authored. As to thing number 9, automation, we strive to create a reproducibility package that requires minimal actions to reproduce the study and verify the results. The codes used relative paths and names of output files are actually mapped to sections of the paper for easy verification. We also have a master file that execute all codes to simplify the execution of codes. And finally, thing 10, which is the review. We review the manuscript, the code, the output, the README, and other documentation related to the study. And then we validate the package that we create. We do maintenance reviews as well of the reproducibly packages published over 2 years ago, including this one, to ensure that their continued access and functionality. So we are now wrapping up the maintenance review of this study. So that's all for me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So I'm here taking over for Tumai, who couldn't be with us today. So really briefly, I'm just going to talk about the use of the 10 Cure Fair things. And Florio, I think, did a fantastic job of giving a really great example of Cure Fair things in use at Cornell. So I don't have to speak too much about it. So thank you, Florio. So just sort of articulating 3 different use cases for the 10 Cure Fair things. So first off, the 10 Cure Fair things could be used for training researchers, data support professionals, even graduate students, undergraduate students. But it really does provide an instructional framework for teaching these essential concepts and standards and best practices for curating data for reproducibility and really developing that robust research compendium. So that's one way in which you could use the 10 Cure Fair things. Another way would be to help develop and evaluate data curation workflows. So if this is an area that you are interested in or your institute is interested in, the 10 Cure Fair things is a really great way of sort of outlining and starting that process of really developing your data curation workflows. What are the necessary actions that we need to take in order to get this workflow implemented at our own institution? And then finally, articulating the purpose of the data management policies and their implementation is another way that the 10 Cure Fair things can be used. Because it does describe standards-based guidelines, it can be used to inform any requirements of data policies that might promote reproducibility. And I am speaking in the context of a verification, like a data verification policy. So here at the Odom Institute, we oversee, manage, and implement a data verification workflow that helps to enforce the AJPS, the American Journal of Political Sciences, data verification policy. So they have a policy in place that requires authors to submit all of their data code and documentation underlying the results in their accepted manuscripts before they can be published. And so the authors will submit those materials and they are then sent to us at the Odom Institute, where we perform a verification workflow and review of those materials in alignment with the 10 Cure Fair things. And so we perform all of these different actions and make sure that all of the materials in the research compendium that is submitted to us are complete, robust, and transparent so that people are able to reuse and reproduce the results from the manuscripts being published by this particular journal. So that is another use case for 10 Cure Fair things. And I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Tom so that we can wrap up the rest of the presentation itself and then open it up for questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay, so as we've heard, I'm going to talk about where this could go in the future. So as you've heard, there is this recommendation which is available via this DOI, and that recommendation, in line with standard practice with RDA recommendations, has now entered into maintenance mode with the working group wrapping up. So as part of that process, we have to nominate a maintenance home for the output, and the maintenance home for this output will be the Odom Institute. Those supporting outputs that we mentioned before basically remain as is and fixed in time in that moment, but the recommendation itself, we're very much welcoming any suggestions or modifications of that output. Whoops. So as we said before, there is a website version. This is a much more consumable version of the 10 Cure Fair things. So particularly because there's a heavy amount of hyperlinking between the various things, because everything is ultimately connected to everything. So you may prefer to consume the 10 things in that format. Or actually, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of the 10 Fair things, suggest changes and so on, the 10 Fair things are basically available via a GitHub repository, and they're captured as Markdown files. Markdown files are a mix of human readable text with a minimal amount of markup to help glue things together, so to speak. So you can contribute right now to the 10 Fair things if you see an issue or something that you would like to improve. To do that, what we would like you to do is, I think as a first step, you're actually going to have an account on GitHub to do some of these steps. But if you could please open an issue against the website to tell us basically what you're worried about or what suggestion you would like to make, and then make edits directly to the Markdown file and submit a pull request. You don't need to be a Git expert to do this. The interface on GitHub is sufficient for modifying one file at a time. So don't be put off by the fact that it is using a website that might be new for you. It is reasonably straightforward to go to a file, add an edit to that file, and then submit a pull request all in one go. Pull request is just the terminology used in that context. If you are a little bit more advanced in the use of Git though, and you would like to spin off this output into your own variant, please fork the repository rather than modifying the main one, and have at it. Do whatever you like with the output, where we remain open to variations occurring. So we actually see plenty of opportunities to take this output and do with it what you like, basically, including contributing to the main effort. We've already highlighted some of those, but to start off, let me say all of the materials are available as CC BY. There is no issue with using these materials. You don't need to seek permission or anything like that if you would like to use them for your own purposes. So some areas that could help in reshaping this file, perhaps your use case is that you need materials that are shorter than the original. So it is a rather long resource. And if you wanted to, for instance, extract just the awareness level raising, getting started sections of the document and produce a one-page version of this just to introduce people to the concepts, please go ahead and do that. That would be great. It's in three different technical formats right now, but we would welcome any experimentation with taking it into other formats as well. So it's available as a PDF, it's available as a website to be consumed, and it's available in Markdown, which could be an input for another format again. And yeah, as we've mentioned before, the detail can be updated. I think an angle we haven't mentioned before is it can also be translated. So if that's your passion and you'd like to bring this to broader audiences, particularly as we have in this session translation into French and Spanish, we very much welcome such an activity, whether it's for some sections or all sections as well. So this effort isn't just the people in the room. RDA working groups are a collaborative, collective effort, and we would like to thank the group or list members against this particular recommendation, which I'm just scrolling through here. I'm not going to read out all the names, but thank you for those people who were merely monitoring the activity to see if there were any parallel actions that could be done or connections between other activities, through to actually substantially providing input into the production of the output. In fact, I'd like to call out these people in particular who helped very closely with some of the outputs. Under the first dot point were those contributors that really helped with the production of the final recommendation, either through commentary or through directly writing sections of the 10 fair things. And under the second dot point, the challenges report is a really interesting report. It's quite long and there's a lot of evidence gathered within it. And I'd like to thank the two people listed there, particularly for their help in compiling that report and producing a lot of the content of the report as well. And with that, we can move on to answering any of our remaining questions in the chat. And please do enter your questions now so that we can respond to them. So Rob Casey asks, how do you provide data access instructions that stand the test of time? Organizations come and go, code is retired, services are no longer supported. A focus on identifiers and parameters only, so would it be a focus on identifiers and parameters only, which would have a DOI? Perhaps we can start with Limor in responding to that one.
Sure, I could give it a try. I mean, I think that is the underlying sort of basic challenge that we have, which is are people depositing their data in certified and trusted repositories? Are they producing DOIs? Are they providing data citation information? So I think that step is crucial. We basically sort of think about it in two different ways. You can have the entire research compendium deposited in one repository, but there are cases, as in the case that Florio mentioned, where data access is restricted, that the data has to live somewhere else. And if the data is somewhere else, the best we could do is provide very detailed information on how to get it, and specifically the version of the data, the time the original data was obtained, the specific version, and so that we can approximate the best conditions for obtaining the same data that was used originally. That would be what I would say. I think yes, DOIs are a good start.
Florio, would you, or Mandy, have you got anything to add?
No, I think Limor covered everything. I mean, you do as much as you possibly can to get as much information provided to the next users. The DOI would be great, but unfortunately, that's not the reality of every resource that you use. So you do as much as you possibly can to describe where you got it, when you got it, the condition it was in, the version it was, all of that. So that is the best I think that we can offer.
Yeah, and I agree as well. And then we've, as I mentioned earlier, we've added actually the maintenance review as part of our workflow, reviewing studies that were published over 2 years ago to make sure that to see if their code is still functioning.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, I mean, I would agree with everyone so far and say, what we're capturing here are complex objects made up of many parts that have more or less development in terms of the stability of the resources and infrastructure associated with them and the emergence of best practice against each of those parts. And so what we might find, so in correctly pulling apart the object and handling each component or step, what we may find is that some parts degrade or lose access, but the other parts persist for longer, and that's why we need to, over time, increase the care that we give against each of those parts as well.
If I can just follow up and take this opportunity to make the shout out for data professionals and other research support professionals, because researchers themselves might not have the skills or the time or the patience to very specifically identify things and make sure that they are accessible later on. But there are professionals who know how to do this kind of work and can help. If they're embedded with the research team in the first place, they can make sure that happens during active research. They can capture the data, they can identify, describe it, document it. And so I really see it as an opportunity or another sort of rationale for why we need data professionals to work closely with researchers on these kind of issues.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure. I'm sure no one on the panel here today would disagree, actually. I'll move us on to the next question. which well, actually is more of a comment. So I'm going to move on to the question from Adam. What prior work and solutions most inspired your 10 things set and the FAIR principles? Well, I don't think we can comment on what inspired the FAIR principles as a separate activity, but the FAIR things in general. I would say the FAIR things influenced us heavily in our work, not the other way around. But would anyone like to reflect on that, particularly because we all had different foci in the things that we were looking at? Perhaps we can go around the room. And this time, well, if anyone wants to jump in rather than me putting you on the spot, then go for it.
I'll jump in just real quick and just say what inspired the 10 things is really it's a product of the experience that that we have had over the last, in my case, 10 years of working in this area, but along with Mandy and Tumai and Florio in their institutions in the last few years doing this sort of work and seeing what it takes to really present and capture a reproducible research compendium that can be published and then archived. And so it's really born out of experience. Obviously, like we said, there's a lot of literature out there too, and there are a lot of references that we relied on from other kind of 10 things. I think there's 10 fair data things, and gold standards and data curation, you know, so it really draws from a variety of things. But for me, I would just say the very kind of first thing is just experience of what we need, the kind of work that's needed.
Mandy or Florio?
Yeah, for me, again, it's also the experience that we've had working with the reproduction materials of our researchers. Based on our experience, we have not encountered a perfect reproducibility package. We've always have to address some issues with the reproducibility package, which makes it really important that we have the 10 things always incorporated, always embedded in the research workflow.
Yeah, so I'm just going to be an echo chamber here and say it is definitely influenced by our experiences here at the Odom Institute with the work that we do in reproducible research workflows for our journal verification work. So these 10 things are things that we consistently are working towards, and we are helping the authors who submit to these journals to better understand these processes so that they can make the most robust and transparent research compendium possible for future users. So.
And then I'll finish this up by saying, for me, perhaps most influential was the work of a different RDA working group, which was the FAIR for RS, or FAIR for Research Software working group, which actually really tackled the hard problem of, well, how do we actually talk about FAIR when we're talking about software or code as an output alongside data. So much energy and understanding has gone into the work that we need to do for data, but often software has remained in the too hard basket, or it's just a thing, you know. It's hard enough doing the data as well. And so, you know, that work and the recommendations coming out of that work is highly influential for me, at least, if not for the group, in terms of getting into the hard stuff, if you like. So I'll move on to our next question, which is, do we see journals making the research compendium mandatory supplementary information?
I'm happy to tackle that one.
Yeah, go for it, Mandy.
I think that this is a conversation that lots of different professional organizations have been having, those that do have their own journals that they publish. I think it gets to the question of readiness of those communities, whether or not they are ready for that level of commitment to that kind of additional output. But the Cure Fair things could be a way of sort of outlining how to put together those research compendiums if journals did want to eventually make that part of submitting as, you know, their supplementary information. So you could really develop a robust research compendium to include alongside of your appendices and your final published manuscript, which I think would be fantastic. But obviously it is up to the readiness of that community themselves and a commitment of that journal and the editorial team, because it is work. it does take work. So but it is possible. But yes, again, readiness.
Yeah, I mean, I just to build on that, publisher policies tend to track behind a community will or emerging norms. And so that can be reflected, you know, there's two sort of levels that it operates at. It can be reflected by an editorial group who are representative of their particular community, wanting to set standards in a particular journal. Or it could be at the publisher level, it could be an aspirational policy where they see a reason to align with, you know, a larger movement, like, for instance, a push towards open science or open ways of working, in which case they take a stance on that. But generally speaking, it has to start with the community itself wanting to make that change and reflecting that change through an emerging normative practice. Limon, did you want to add anything?
I'm afraid that we are nearing the end. Yeah.
We are too, yes. So actually, what I'd like to wrap up with is to say that we will be answering the remaining questions. There will be an email going out following on from this survey, from this, presentation. And my apologies for not getting to the remaining questions in the Q&A box. Stephanie, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, can you stop sharing and I'll go ahead and start sharing mine. Thank you so much. Oh no, there goes my dog. Oh, my apologies. Working from home, the joys of working from home. So I want to take this moment to thank, please help me join in thanking Limor, Mandy, Floria, and Tom for this great presentation, and also for the members of the working group. I also want to thank those behind the scenes, Megan and Rebecca, for providing technical support, and the interpreters. Thank the Digital Research Alliance in Canada for arranging the French interpreter services. Thanks to our French interpreter, Yanitza, who has been with us for I think every one of these webinars. And thanks to Federico Centrangelo and Andrea Mora with Campos La Referencia for arranging the Spanish interpreter services. And thanks to our Spanish interpreter today, Leslie Gonzalez. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar recordings and slides will be available on the RDA website. I put a link in the chat and I put a link in the Q&A to that website. The slides will be up today or tomorrow, and then next week will be the recordings. We have two more upcoming webinars for this year, and one is Research Metadata in October and DMP Common Standards Work Group in November. We also launched, I mentioned our podcast series. I won't go through the whole list, but please look at the RDA Alliance.org podcast page or go to Podbean platform and subscribe. There are a lot of really great ones, and we have 3 or 4 more coming online soon. Also want to remind everybody that our 2023 plenary will be our 10th year anniversary, and it will be in Gothenburg, Sweden, where it all started, and it's going to be March 21st through the 23rd, and it's co-hosted by Chalmers University and the University of Gothenburg. And I want to thank you all for being here and joining us today, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.